Thanks very much, Tom, for first of all explaining the fact that this wasn't a case of shameless self-promotion, but in fact the selection of the keynote speakers preceded the fact that Bob was going on sabbatical, and I would inherit his responsibilities, and I certainly have even more respect for everything Bob puts into this conference over the years. Now I've had to walk in his shoes. Very often working with my colleagues who I get on really well with and have enjoyed in the Leman chair, after a little while you sort of understand why certain things happen, and this morning's one of those occasions because as program chair I'm really delighted with the speech, the talk that Christine gave. I think it was terrific. And I'd never heard her speak before, and I figure now all the other guys on the committee and have obviously heard her speak, and that's why they let me have the intimidating task of coming on to speak after her. With that said, I think to have... okay. I don't have an image on here. I'm going to talk about work I've been doing here in the role of the Leman Chair on new approaches to disease surveillance. And to a certain extent, I'm doing things. I came here, I started going in a direction which wasn't what most people were familiar with, the work I'd done in sort of food safety particularly. Just want to start off with a little bit of philosophy. Population health is a moving target. Christine's done a great job in just explaining how things have changed on a long-term scale with respect to the interaction between pathogen, host and environment. And if we go back far enough, some very wise biologists were saying this is not a surprise. Nothing in the world of living things is permanently fixed. And read an article, discussing, the H1N1 and blaming agriculture, and the quote that the person came up with is, if we need to blame something, we should be blaming biology, because it's this really mix of viruses, bacteria, hosts, environment that has been going on for millennia. It's not a novel thing. Australia is a very large country, similar to the size of the US, and it has a population approximately the size of Belgium. We don't generate many Nobel Prize winners where I come from, but one which we did is a very famous immunologist called McFarland Burnett, and this is, I guess, to point out that even the smartest Australian gets things wrong a fair bit, because what he said in the 1960s was, we're at a point in time in human history where we've had a great sociological change, which is the elimination of infectious disease as a significant factor in social life. If you look at the discussions and the meetings going on around the country and the city of the day, prediction is, as we know, a very precarious game. But just to show that Australians didn't sort of have a monopoly on unwise predictions, the US Surgeon General in the same time was certainly quoted very often as saying it's time to close the book on infectious diseases and declare the war on pestilence as over, and we won the battle against nature. And perhaps my favourite of these three, being in academia and having my chairman as introducing me, so this comes from the academia. The Dean of Yale Medical School in 1976 was introducing himself and talking to a class of incoming medical students, and he said, there are no new diseases to be discovered. And of course that was about, before they graduated, the whole world was grappling with AIDS. So just pointed out to be even very smart people in the game of prediction are prone to getting things wrong. As we know, lots of new pathogens since that time, in plants, in animals, in humans. As we've seen in many presentations, we've got great understanding now of agents, of the molecular pathogenesis of diseases down to the sort of nanoscale of understanding, which has taken us a long way. When we step back and say, well, what's driving changes in disease patterns at a bigger level, even at a herd level, or a regional level, or a national level, or international level, our understanding of what drives these changes is very, very rudimentary in contrast to our understanding of the agents, their molecular structure, their pathogenesis. And a quote that I saw recently, the title of an article was saying, despite all the preparations that we do, we're forever unprepared because of the predictable unpredictability of the biological sphere, I guess. Our swine industry, everyone in the room knows, we've had our share of teachable moments in the course of my own career. Major pandemics, PRRS, PCV2, the event in Nipah virus in Malaysia in 1998, a very frightening outbreak of a zoonotic disease that was limited to that area, fortunately. We've had the worldwide discovery that pigs are infected with hepatitis E virus as a potentially zoonotic agent, even though it's probably been there for millennia, and we didn't have the diagnostic tools to turn over the rock and say, oh, guess what, that's there, what does it mean? An event in my home country of just a one-off event, a zoonotic transmission of a novel paramyxovirus, again from bats into pigs, and a human case, but one which went absolutely nowhere. We've all read about the unusual event of this Chinese epidemic of Streptococcus suis type 2 infection and the focus that brought on pigs and pig production and pork safety. Currently, trying to understand the discovery of a fairly high prevalence of MRSA particular strains in pigs in Europe and North America and probably many more places as we again go forward diagnostically and turn over the rock and see what is there. You know what, in 2009. So we've had our share of events, and I think we can argue at the moment as to whether this virus is really an emerging disease of pigs, because there's been almost no documented or discovered cases of the novel virus in the natural pig population, even though many of us understand that the fervour for discovering that is probably less than it could be. If I could say that I think our Swine Futures project that was done by the Pork Board and the USDA was really understanding the situation we're dealing with, because even if it's not an emerging disease, it's an emerging disease issue, because it's which they define as any sudden economic impact that can be related to an immediate effect on productivity, a real or perceived effect to public health, and finally a real or perceived risk to a country that is importing our product. And I now come to life's third certainties. We all know about death and taxes, and it comes back to the question that Christine answered. I think the third one is any emerging disease issue in pigs will be widely and immediately proclaimed to be the result of industrial farming. And I really enjoyed Christine's response to that question, because we never let the facts get in the way of a good argument in some of our discussions. We've all heard the cough that was heard around the world, and this was and what led to the accusation of the Smithfield Enterprise Granges Carroll in Mexico, and we had an immediate epidemic of finger pointing at that particular operation, that particular company, and CAFOs and all the other bad words that might be attached to confinement production of swine. I think the interesting thing was that now the Mexicans have done more work and gone back serologically and virologically. They actually found that the first cases were nowhere near Edgar, the little cute as a button 5-year-old who you couldn't but adore, standing by the big pig industry that you couldn't really like. But there was no evidence now that the first cases occurred in that area. They were in an area that is considered an immigration corridor, and their initial cases have no apparent implication or exposure to the swine industry. I think the other interesting thing about that, we've had a deafening silence around the world with respect to, oh, look, we were wrong. The evidence wasn't there. The implication for Edgar and that particular farm was obviously wrong. And I think that's one of the issues that we have to go forward with, is that we have a very selective amplification of news items that relate to our industry. So I think it's worth, what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time, and it goes back to Tim and Paul's talk yesterday of getting our story out and understanding and talking about what we have done. And I think with industrialisation, if I can use that word, because others do, of swine production and its disease emergence, what have we really done? We have changed things, and we've had changes in systems will change the disease patterns we've seen. But the principal thing is, most of those changes we have done because we are attempting to improve the health of the animal, the safety of the product. And Tim and Paul spoke yesterday, and I'm forever grateful to them, and will thank them as often as I can, about the disease problems that we've tackled and we've got on top of, and they've gone away. And Tim, again, an area of mine, demonstrable improvements of food safety. We can still read regularly about how pork safety is gone away, that today's pork product is a dangerous product. And I think if you look at the facts and the information, I think I'll quote Robert de Rosier, I think anyone who says that should ask their doctor to check their medication, because it's completely at odds with all the information that we have. The other things, productivity is increased dramatically, and we heard about that yesterday, to a fault in the modern systems, without, I would argue, any substantial negative impact on human health. But we do have different and ongoing changes in pig health, and that's why disease brings us back year after year, and we always are fighting with that changing biological reality. So when I look at things that we have done that might be epidemiologically significant, particularly in the emerging disease area, one of them is less direct human contact per animal produced. So less opportunities for pig to human transmission on a volume production issue. I think that's unequivocal. Reduced rates of interspecies contact through our biosecurity, coming back to what Christine said about outdoor farms and old production styles. Increase interspecies transmissions, and with herd size particularly, we deal with large populations that are in close contact. So we do open the avenues for emergence of diseases that are probably transmissible easily pig to pig. So if we look at the things we now deal with more and more as ongoing problems, and I've listed some up there, all our Suis bacteria, which are essentially close to being normal flora in pigs. They're meant to be in pig populations, and we've struggled with more severe epidemics as we've improved health status and altered immunity and altered time of exposure. And I think unequivocally the emerging diseases are more likely to be host-specific in these scenarios, and that's what we've seen with our genuine pandemics of pig disease, of PRRS and PCV virus. And my friend Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt has a slide of 25 poultry emerging diseases, nearly all of which, since 1970, nearly all of which are highly host-specific. So we have a very analogous situation in confinement of poultry, which shouldn't be of any surprise to anybody with an epidemiological bone in their body, but it's still contrary to what is being passed around in the public media. So I think we do select for our problems because of the way we develop industry structure. Certainly our age-segregated systems have been great for controlling health within systems, but they're founded on transport, and we move a lot of pigs around, and mobility is risk. And this is a slide that Spencer Wayne put together looking at interstate data, and it's just charting out the movement of pigs interstate on health papers 2002. And all you need to do is look at that and say, that's a big mess. We've got a lot of pig movement. And when we look at the numbers, more than 25% of our production at that stage was moving interstate, so that doesn't even look at the intrastate movement we have. So we know we are dealing with a lot of pig movement, and that's contributed to some of the problems we've selected for, particularly with agents that can spread farm to farm despite our best biosecurity, such as PRRS, obviously, mycoplasma, and as I think we all understand, influenza. So the challenges in pig health that we're looking at going forward are these hyper-endemic agents that spread farm to farm, and always we're going to be dealing with a situation of how do we deal with emerging diseases and respond to emerging diseases that are real, that are perceived, that are problems for swine health, or potentially have zoonotic implications. I have been in the Leman chair. I only ever had one conversation with Al Leman. He died not long after I came to the US, and I only had the opportunity to hear him speak at a meeting once, and it was at this conference in 1991. And he stood up, and 1991 was the year where the US had been grappling with mystery swine disease for about 4 years. The etiology was only just discovered before I came here, and as we're all aware, the discovery happened in Holland, and they'd been dealing with the disease only for a period of months. And so it was a little bit of a black eye for our US industry and scientists that, you know, they got it before we did. And Al stood up, and it wasn't the virologist he was looking at, he just bemoaned the failure of the whole system. We'd had this disease sweep across the country, who should have stepped up to the plate? Was it industry? Was it government, academia, veterinarians? And he pretty much said the whole system has let us down in this, and we've got to be able to do better for it. So my question is, have things changed? Should they? How should they change? And we know we haven't progressed quite as much, maybe quite as far as we'd want to have. So it comes back to who's got the responses and the responsibilities for those responses. For some places it's clear. Foreign animal diseases, we have a structure, federal, state agencies, pretty good game planned. When we're dealing with the diseases we know about, the PRRS, the mycoplasma, that's right in the heart of the practicing veterinarians, the private sector, and our guys have done a great job and continue to in trying to tackle those problems. We also have the twilight zone, and that's what I'm calling it, all those times where you have a health event which doesn't fit in the textbook. And I know I've been in practice in the old days now. These things happen where you see things, and this is weird. What's going on? They might be high mortality outbreaks we don't understand. We had a great example that Mike Strobel dealt with here with Tesho virus in 2005. Most of the time they don't go anywhere. They don't herald a big epidemic that's going to come and sweep us away, but we still have to know how to respond to them. It's easy to know after the event maybe what the right response is, but we have to act now when we don't really know which way to go. We're in an export industry now, and that makes it particularly complex because any event that's announced, that's investigated, can have repercussions in our export markets, and we're very familiar with how that's played out in the last few years. We've had huge international collaboration on response capability to flu virus, but no matter your best preparations, the horse can still bolt if it's a highly transmissible agent, and that's the case with PRRS and PCV2 and H1N1. It was only days, essentially, after the discovery of this virus that the WHO announced, we can't control this. The horse has already bolted. So despite our best efforts, in some cases biology will trump us, as Tom Stein might have said. If we under-respond, we have a missed opportunity. If we overreact, we incur maybe unwarranted costs. So how do we go about it? I'll finally get to the work I'm doing here. There's a lot of context, but you can't have a good response if you don't have good infrastructure of diagnostics, communication, coordination. How are you going to make a response happen? So unless that's thought through, you're really not in a place to kick it off. And if you're improving your infrastructure in the tools and diagnostics and response you've got, you give yourself a broader range of options to respond. So when the next one comes, maybe we've got more options because we've got better infrastructure. So Al's Leman's challenge, if we look in 2009, what was needed back then in 1987 to control the PRRS epidemic, if it was ever possible? Who should have driven it? 20 years on, how far further down the track are we? One thing I think, if we don't have public health risk, we're in a situation now it's very hard to get public resources to fund these things. Therefore, in my view, and when I came here, that's what drove the direction I went to, the industry, the profession has to look at approaches for coordinated management of emerging diseases and the types of regional control things that are now sort of gaining momentum in the country. There's a lot that needs to be done for political reasons, but we need to look at what's the infrastructure, what's the logistics. The whole Ebola, hot zone, what I call bio-angst that really got some legs in the 1990s, it happened to coincide with an era where we all know the phenomenal IT revolution and expansion in medical informatics communications. There's now books written on biosurveillance as a new discipline which integrates all these things about communications, IT, biology, epidemiology, everything you can think of. And the objectives of surveillance in the modern world have expanded. People are now looking at national, global scope of surveillance systems. They're developing, they're in place. Near real time. We don't want to know, wait for the diagnostic lab report to find out what happened the year before. We want to know very quickly about changing patterns of disease. So we need better veterinary surveillance and increasingly now, better integration of human and animal disease surveillance. The key point here is how do we harness communications and IT tools to empower surveillance, and it can be done even in low capacity settings. So in third world countries now, people are looking, how do we use the internet? How do we use these tools to be able to improve surveillance in humans and in animal areas across the world? So it brings it back to the position of the veterinarian, and the veterinarians are the front line. You're the people who see things, the weird stuff, when it happens for the first time. And I think generally practicing veterinarians have been underutilised as a resource of surveillance and epidemiological intelligence. How do we bring together all the things that you people are seeing in a way that won't actually do us harm? One thing that favours it is the consolidation that we've seen in the industry and in veterinary services, because when there's fewer people at the table, it becomes easier to start looking at exchanging information, collecting information. And I think that's why we see the poultry industry perhaps a little bit further down the track than we are in the swine industry, simply as a function of concentration. But there has been a lot of pioneering projects in the area of trying to capture farm-level, veterinary-level data for purposes of surveillance, but they're all pretty much based on communications, IT, advances that help us get data remotely. And I've just got a list up here. The first one I was actually involved in New Zealand. These are all veterinary surveillance projects that are developing around in different parts of the world. Some have failed and some have developed. But they're all, what's in common, they're all using IT tools to try and facilitate data capture, analysis, communication in relation to animal disease. And that brings me pretty much to where the area I've been working on in regional control communication. We need, if we want to do regional control projects, we have to have mechanisms for integrating the data and communicating with each other. In mandatory systems, as we've had with regulated diseases, pseudorabies, the government fills that function and it's a little bit easier. In voluntary systems, we've got to deal with what we're willing to share and how we share that confidential information. There's a bush telegraph amongst the veterinarians. A lot of you ring each other. You know a lot of what is going on. All that is under the radar. Is there a way of formalising a structure to get what is useful to us out of that and using it more efficiently? Bob Morrison, again, has made some great progress over an extended time, we have to say. This is hard stuff to get these things going in the county projects in Minnesota, where producers are sharing information about disease status on farms, and they're able to view maps across the web. So they've got comfortable with sharing information in the view that that is in their collective interest to do that rather than to not share it. So the issue, if we're going to have better surveillance tools in our industry, is not if we're going to do it, but how we should do it. And that brings us towards geography and the fact that geography really matters. This is a map. I think I've got a pointer here. Let's see how it works. It doesn't matter too much. The map up there is in the centre is Stevens County, which is the thanks Ernie's saving me. Another crisis, another saviour. You know, I've had a week like that. The Stevens County project, and the green are known PRRS negative herds, and the map when that started was very, very different, and that project now being extended into the surrounding counties where there's a very small number of red dots, which meaning PRRS herds. The blue dots are unknown herd status. But just the visual power that progress has been made, that we have that area where we're very close to eliminating PRRS from there, and the visual power of the map with producers to say, yeah, we can go forward. These are very effective communication tools, even if we're not analysing them as such. I mentioned the other day in a pre-conference workshop, geography has been a discipline that has been revolutionized by IT and analysis and computing power. It's phenomenal. You all use MapQuest. Many of you probably use GPSs to drive guided on satellite imagery. You've probably all got kids that play around on Google Earth. I mean, that power of that technology, it's sort of like running water. You just start taking it for granted after a while without thinking about the smarts and the infrastructure that's gone into it, and it is really phenomenally powerful tools. That should empower our efforts to control animal disease. If geography matters, and being able to visualise and analyse disease patterns on an area basis, if geography is getting smarter, we should be getting smarter, and that's really what has driven me down this path that I've been on for a little while. So, modern GIS, geographical information systems, They can greatly facilitate epidemic management. And if we go back to the UK foot and mouth epidemic, just really the necessity to be able to rapidly manage information about disease spread is really important to critical decision making. And beyond that, when we get into the really smart people who are able to look at detailed spatial analysis, they can delve into the data and give us better insight in understanding how diseases spread in populations, what is the effect of distance on risk, and a lot of things that we're actually really interested with respect to PRRS, influenza, and other diseases. So if we go one step further, and there is a GISVET society, which is people who are interested in GIS in application to veterinary challenges, and so we're really getting it towards the geeky edge of the veterinary profession here, where we're looking at how do we use computers and analytical systems, and they're talking about spatial decision support systems, and really what you're doing here is integrating spatial data, which is basically your map, your information about locations, into animal health information systems, which might be databases about disease status where you look at them but you never had the ability to rapidly interface them with mapping. And these systems can underpin decisions for disease control. And there's some very advanced systems around that have been used in situations like the UK FMD epidemic. I think there's vast potential applications of what we can do with this technology if we're willing to move on and use it. I think what I asked myself, and I'm about to show you my toy, I guess, how do we change them, move them from being toys to being tools, and move them out of the development research area and put them in the environment where they're effectively used by the veterinary profession and the swine industry. So, after I figured out I was going to go down this route, with Jerry Torreson, principally, we just came up with this name of the Minnesota Cooperative Disease Mapping Project. And when we started out back several years ago, we were really sort of pleased that we could see these satellite images and put yellow dots on them, and we'd think that's really cool. That's going to help us move forward. And the group of people involved, a lot of University of Minnesota faculty, practicing swine veterinarians, Minnesota Board of Animal Health, sharing their information with us. And the real goal we were looking at here is what I'm talking about. Can we develop tools to support real-time disease surveillance in the Minnesota swine industry? And obviously the world doesn't stop at the Minnesota-Iowa border, and neither do the viruses, but you've got to try and think, what can we bite off in a digestible lump? And that's obviously where we started. And what we were looking towards was this idea, can we move towards having near real-time surveillance and mapping, particularly to support the types of regional disease control initiatives that are now sort of starting to pop up around the country. Okay, I told Tom I had a sort of intellectual breakthrough when I woke up at 3 o'clock, and that was about putting the monkey in front of the computer, because I wanted to focus on the user, a high primate who has access to the internet. And I'm just going to give you a visual to try and show you the process that we've gone through in trying to develop the tool that I'll then show you live if the internet lets me do it. Really what it starts with is a user who could be a veterinarian in practice or in his computer at home or a production company or whoever that's interacting with a web-based database. And there's nothing new to that, and there's a lot of information already crossing the web for barn monitoring and all sorts of things, production in our production system. So there's nothing particularly exciting there. We'll have a user that's got an internet-based access to a database, and that database has got information about their farms, their farm information, their disease status. The key thing is that database is confidential, so only that user can see it. We have another thing where we're wanting to visualize here the world and put his farms on the map. One thing I want to point to is the development since we started this in access to GIS technology is such that we can now map the world without any problem. We started with thinking at the beginning Minnesota's too big. There's no problem now. We can plot stuff anywhere on the planet. The other thing I wanted to point out here with these two red spots we've got in Mongolia and Uzbekistan or somewhere is your data's never perfect. You've got to work with what you've got, and that's what happens if you're in Stevens County and you leave the minus sign off your longitude. So it's always a it's always a work in progress to try and perfect the data that you've got. And again, this is MapQuest, a user over the web looking at a map. We've got that tool. The tricky part, and I really appreciated Tom Stein's comments yesterday about, oh, this will be easy. And then you find out, well, as the more you discover, the harder that it actually gets. And so it's this integration thing. How do we have down, and what I should have pointed out here, while the user's interface with the database is confidential, his interface with the mapping system is shared, because we want to have a capability for our veterinary practitioners or our production companies, whoever has got authorised access to the data, to be able to share information through that geographical interface. So what we've got to work out here is how do we get the database talking to the mapping system and vice versa, so that we can go in through our confidential database and move into the mapping format, or alternately, how can we go into the mapping interface and obtain shared information about the farms in a region. And so we've gone down that road, and that was sort of, if we can make that work, that's really good. So we're into it for about 2 years, and guess what happens? Google Earth. And so I'm thinking, have I just wasted 2 or 3 years, because now all of a sudden Google's Earth's there and anyone can do anything through this? And it's a phenomenal tool for any that haven't played with it. Well, what Google Earth did was actually make it very easy to do the global scope. I mean, all of a sudden, instead of being hard to do Minnesota, it was easy to do the world in terms of geographic scope. The other thing that it did was say it gave us opportunities for interfacing with it, and most importantly, communication. Because with Google Earth, it's very easy to email maps between users. So the thinking we had then was, okay, rather than give up and let Google Earth people do what they want with that, why don't we see if we can make our system talk to Google Earth, which would give the user the opportunity to say, okay, here's confidential data from my database. I want to send that into Google Earth, and with that Google Earth, I can send it confidentially to colleagues or co-workers in my company, in my veterinary practice. Alternately, the user could say, okay, I'm interested in this region, we want to put a guilt developer in there, I want to know what farms are around there, even if I don't know anything about their database. They can then say, okay, here's this shared information, but it gives us a means to say, okay, we can send that to Google Earth and we can email that to the people who need to see it. So the development of Google Earth really changed the paradigm, and as Tom says, then you go back and you've got to start all over again to be able to make that happen. So that's the thinking, the user in the middle, the confidential database, the shared information through a mapping interface, and the ability to draw selectively either confidential or shared data through the Google Earth channel, and then put that, be able to communicate that very rapidly. So these were some questions that crossed my mind some years back. If we're going to do regional disease control, we need epidemiologic intelligence. Does our industry need, and these are rhetorical questions really, better infrastructure to address current and future disease challenges? Do we want to harness modern technology and methods? How do we convert toys into tools? And I think the avenues we're learning and moving forward with this through the Minnesota PRRS Eradication Task Force, through the ASV, National Pork Board, leading veterinarians and producers. We're just pushing the can down the road. And it was like with Tom yesterday, that battling away, sticking with that problem. If this was easy, someone would have done it, and we're really getting into trying to get the rubber on the road here. Future possibilities. Daryl Holtkamp, and many of you are aware, and with Al Pulse and others, have developed the PADRAP tool that's now used for the ASVs for risk assessment, regional control. Daryl and I are talking, how can we get together to make these systems, which are complementary, talk to each other so that we can develop a more powerful tool. So we might be moving forward with that. And I just want to tell Joe Connor that might even mean I apply for a visa and come down to Illinois at some stage. Interfacing with the veterinary diagnostic database or databases, so that there's technologically no reason you couldn't go in through a map interface and access diagnostic histories through that GIS interface, or look at specialised diagnostic services, regional dendrograms. The technology can do it. It takes money, it takes programming, and Tom and I will tell you it'll take longer than you think it will to get it done. But it's essentially, we're limited by our imagination in terms of how we want to move forward and develop more technology-based and powerful tools. I've got some acknowledgements I'd like to make. First of all, my group, colleague at the University of Minnesota in the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab and in the Swine Division, and also in the department. My time at the Leman Chair has been great. People have been very supportive to me.